We're actively part of the task forces submitting suggestions. In fact, one of the suggestions the Democrats submitted during the drafting was plus up those unemployment insurance numbers. And they got agreement. This was drafted in a bipartisan manner, but what happened? I got to tell you, yesterday, Sunday, most of us thought we were going to move to this. But then Nancy Pelosi decided it was time to play politics. Decided to throw a grenade into the whole process, and she had a list of demands, an over 1,000-page bill that she drops out of nowhere. And the demands she's pushing, I ask you, do these have anything to do with the coronavirus epidemic? A number of people have cited the famed quote from Rahm Emanuel, who's President Obama's chief of staff, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Sadly, we're seeing the embodiment of that cynical approach right now. Because all the people out of jobs the Democrats are using to push, what are they pushing for? Changing the emission standards on airplanes. Mr. President, what the hell do the emission standards on airplanes have to do with thousands of people dying and millions of people out of work in the coronavirus epidemic? Don't treat this bill like a partisan Christmas list. And by the way, you know, Republicans, we've got things we would like to advance too. Things I believe in deeply. You want to talk about what I'd like to do? I'd like to abolish the IRS. I've campaigned on that all over the country. I'm going to continue fighting for that. But, Mr. President, I'm not standing here with an amendment saying, as part of this emergency relief, let's abolish the IRS. There's a place for that political and policy discussion. The Democrats are pushing wind and solar tax credits. Mr. President, what in the hell does a windmill have to do with this crisis? Other than there's some Democratic lobbyists getting fat and rich, and they're willing to extort a crisis to try to advance their political agenda. Mandates on corporate board diversity. So these are Democrats that want to social engineer. Now listen, I actually have a lot of problems with corporate boards. I think we have far too many corporate boards that are docile and do what management wants. That's a serious problem. A lot of discussion about stock buybacks. I'll tell you what I get concerned about stock buybacks is when you have compensation agreements in place that the executives get rich if they get a short-term boost in share price, and it ends up hurting the shareholders. So I'd love to see actually more vigorous boards of directors that make sure that you're not creating incentives to game the stock price. That's a reasonable question. But they want to mandate effectively quotas on boards of directors. Mr. President, what in the hell does that have to do with this crisis? The Pelosi wish list wants to restructure the debt for the post office. Mr. President, last I checked, look, our postal workers, they go through wind and rain and snow, but they haven't been laid off. I call upon both sides. Don't play games with this. This crisis isn't going to end tomorrow. It's not going to end the next day. It's going to last for a considerable time. It's going to require adults to step up and lead. On the pandemic, we need to follow the science. We need to listen to the doctors. We need to listen to the physicians. We need to do the steps that we're taking to keep people safe. On the economy, we need to give immediate relief to people who are hurting, and we need to make sure a liquidity crisis doesn't become a solvency crisis. You know, it's interesting. Many of the Democrats are saying they don't want corporate bailouts. Well, listen, I agree with them. I am passionately opposed to corporate bailouts. One of the things I was gratefully relieved about how this bill was structured is that it's structured as loans and not condition-free grants. And it's structured primarily so that it's not picking favored companies that happen to have big lobbying presence in Washington. What does it mean to not have a liquidity crisis become a solvency crisis? Let's take, for example, the airlines. I've spoken with just about every major airline CEO in the